Looking for financial support that strives to honor your community's rich heritage and cultural practices? Introducing RBC Origins. Our Indigenous banking specialists provide resources and advice that can help transform your ideas into tangible progress and community prosperity. At RBC, we're committed to driving your goals forward. Learn more at rbc.com/indigenous. RBC, ideas happen here.
I'm Cierra Bettens. Welcome to APTN News InFocus. This episode, a behind-the-scenes look at APTN's exclusive interview with Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Here we are in your hometown. What's it like to be back?
Well, it's great. It's always great to go home, and pleasure to be in Fort Smith any time of the year. Last time I was here was 2009, I think. It was just after, it was during the financial crisis, and it was probably during March or so.
2 weeks ago, Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Gatineau, Quebec, with hundreds of First Nations chiefs for a summit on Bill C-5.
Canada's new government is committed to working together so we can build Canada together for everyone's benefit. I want to thank you again for being here today. I want to thank you for considering putting your trust in this process. I want to thank you in advance for the work that we will do together today and in the months and the years ahead. And now we will get to work. And thank you for your attention. Merci beaucoup. Miigwech.
The controversial bill became law on June 26th, with the goal of fast-tracking economic development projects of national interest. But it's garnered significant debate among Indigenous leaders. Some see it as an economic opportunity, while others see it as a threat to their rights and lands.
Because we will not sit idly by and watch any government, whether it's Ontario or Canada, to come into our territory and take whatever or whenever they want it, because it is ours.
A week after the summit, Carney returned to his hometown in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, for the first time since being elected Prime Minister. APTN National news host Dennis Ward traveled to Fort Smith to interview Carney about Bill C-5 and his commitments to Indigenous peoples. Dennis joins us in our podcast studio in Winnipeg today to share more on how it went. Thanks so much for joining us, Dennis.
Thanks for having me in your cool new studio.
Good to have you. So you had 15 minutes to interview Prime Minister Mark Carney. How did you narrow down what topics were most important to discuss, and what were those topics?
So we were coming out of the First Nations Summit, as well as like the meeting with all the premiers in Southern Ontario. So C-5 and what projects are going to happen or not happen or potentially going to happen was like a big topic. We had other topics, of course, including, huge funding cuts coming for Indigenous Services Canada. But 15 minutes doesn't give you a whole lot of time. We managed to go a couple, maybe 3 minutes over that. But yeah, they were given the motions to shut this thing down. They had to get to Inuvik, so understood. But that's kind of been the hot topic when it comes to like our panels and things like that. And it didn't seem like the First Nations Summit was a resounding success, although he claims it was. So
Right. And so, as you mentioned during the interview, you really grilled Carney about Bill C-5. And I'm wondering, what were some of the key points that he made?
Yeah, I guess he's kind of selling it as it's just a piece of legislation to help make things happen. I asked him, what does Mark Carney think is a nation-building project? And he's also being careful. I think a lot of people are being careful on naming specific projects. He was saying he was being careful not to name specific projects, but there are a lot out there. We also met with the Premier of Northwest Territories, R.J. Simpson, who was traveling with the Prime Minister in Fort Smith. And, we asked him, what are some of the projects that you have in mind? And it's things as simple that you would think as like a road that connects the north and the south of the Northwest Territories. Gazillion-dollar project, a huge project that they've wanted to do for many, many years that the Premier says has buy-in from Indigenous peoples, but they haven't had a friend in government, so to speak, to help put up the funding for such a massive project. And the Premier of the N.W.T. now feeling like he has that partner there, especially somebody who was born and spent the first couple of years of their life in the territory.
Mm-hmm. So, a week before you had this interview, Carney held a summit with First Nations leadership on Bill C-5. I'm wondering, what did you hear from Carney about how the summit went? And then what did you hear from Indigenous leadership?
Resounding success. His first stop was he was going to meet with some families, talk about food insecurity and affordability at the Fort Smith Community Centre. And when we came downstairs, there were 3 ladies, Indigenous ladies, Connie in particular, holding the sign up saying, "Mark, we love you, but scrap Bill C-5." And so that was kind of my first question to him was, have you been hearing this a lot? And he contends that he hasn't, and he thanked Connie for coming on out, but that people aren't telling him that, and that at the First Nations Summit, he met with, as he put it, 250 plus rights holders, and all of them were bringing ideas to him, projects they'd like to see happen. So I said, if you read the stories, it's been panned. People walked out. We heard of people saying, ministers were the ones doing all the talking. There wasn't a whole lot of chance for leadership to talk. The youth were locked out of the meetings. The media were locked out of the meetings. I mean, if that sounds like a success, sure, but I guess we have differing opinions. But he also said, in the week that's followed, many have been calling his office, calling him, speaking to him, trying to move forward these projects.
And so, with this discussion around Bill C-5, there's been a lot of conflicting arguments, some seeing it as a threat, others seeing it as an economic opportunity. Do you think it's that black and white, or is it more nuanced than that?
Absolutely nuanced. Like even within the Indigenous population, there's groups that would love to see their projects move ahead. We have one here in Manitoba that has the backing of 9-10 First Nations of moving things from Saskatchewan or Alberta up through the north here to the Port of Churchill or to other ports in Hudson Bay there. And I'm sure there's a lot of First Nations in Alberta that would like to see a new pipeline happen as well. And that was the other thing that he said is everybody wants to bring this back to pipelines, because we talked about Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario signing this MOU about bringing a pipeline to Ontario, which Manitoba didn't sign on to, which he was quick to point out as well. And I think that is maybe part of the issue is that a lot of this is, there's going to be pipelines, but a lot of it is also about trying to power communities that are still on diesel or create a road where people can drive from the north of their territory to the south. Bridges, energy corridors of other nature, these port projects. Like he said, there's been a long time where this country, the federal government was saying, no. And this legislation helps ensure that it's easier to say yes. I asked him, well, what project did they turn down in the past decade or so that you would have liked to see go ahead? And he didn't want to comment on that either. But yeah, I think there's it's nuanced for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to go to one of the questions that you asked Carney about, these projects of national interest or nation-building projects. So based on what you heard, what is Carney's idea of a project of national interest? Again,
he was quick to say that he didn't want to. First off, these aren't his ideas. These are leaders are bringing their ideas to him. He doesn't have any in mind in particular, he says. But then he did name a bunch of them. Grays Bay port in Nunavut is one of them that would create a new port up there, and there's minerals all around for that one. I think he named that Mackenzie, that road project also in the Northwest Territories that I had mentioned, because these were top of mind. He was with the Premier. And then he did mention, Wabcanoe and the plan here again to take things through the Port of Churchill. But yeah, he shied away from any pipeline projects, mentioning those. We talked a bit about the Ring of Fire, and I mentioned to him, I've been covering the Ring of Fire for almost 20 years here, and I don't think that project's any further along today than it was back then. But Premier Doug Ford still ready to drive his bulldozer up there himself, and get the project off the ground.
And so, APTN reporter Karen Pugliese came on InFocus twice to talk about Bill C-5, and both times she was really emphasizing how unclear the legislation was. So after the summit and APTN's interview with Carney, does the legislation seem clearer or murkier to you?
I think it's pretty well understood. We're trying to move things along here. There was a study that said, he's got about 6 months here to make things happen. Well, none of these projects are going to be moving ahead in 6 months. Again, the Ring of Fire, there isn't even a road going there. There isn't a rail line. Like these projects, one of the nations up there that is interested in the Ring of Fire moving ahead, they want to build a road to where the development's happening from their nation. That alone is going to take 6 years. So it's going to be a long time, I think, before we see any projects come to fruition, no matter how long they've been on the books.
As you've mentioned, you've been in this industry for decades and you've interviewed many leaders over the years. And I'm wondering, how would you describe the Prime Minister and his government's approach to media relations or, just dealing with journalists right now?
APTN has some issues with dealing with levels of government or political advocacy organizations from time to time. I'd mentioned the fact that, we'd been trying to get a one-on-one with him since the Liberal leadership race. I don't know that he knew that had been the case. Sometimes the man travels with 20-some people, including security or whatever, so he's probably not privy to every interview request that comes in. But, lots of people have asked me since I got back to, what do you think? And he seems like a good guy. We went to some restaurants. He was making himself available to everybody. It's a small town, Fort Smith, 3,000 people. People were coming out of their house and saw him, and he walked over and met with them and everything. And he seemed, I've met worse leaders or people that treated the media with a little more disdain, for sure.
And so, you were only given about 15 minutes, but I'm wondering, in this interview, was there anything that Carney said that surprised you?
Not so much surprised. When it comes to politicians, and he even says it during the interview, he answered a lot of the questions that he wished that I would have asked instead of the ones that we did, and as most seasoned politicians do. The one thing that stuck out to me that was, unfortunately, we're over time, but was something that the APTN National chief, Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanek, had recently taken to the premiers just the day before, saying, bridging the infrastructure gap for First Nations, that should be a project in the national interest. 630-some billion or whatever to bridge that gap, hundreds of thousands of jobs to, build proper homes and water treatment plants and whatever else. And I said, is that in the national interest? And he said, no, that's a different thing altogether. That's a responsibility, not a national interest project, I guess. And, if it's been a responsibility, let's move some things along here then. But it doesn't seem to be that much of a responsibility when it comes to funding announcements that I've seen.
Yeah, and I guess, my final question is, now that Bill C-5 is law, what will be important for reporters and the public to keep an eye on in terms of its impact on Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, I think to speak with those Indigenous peoples, because like we said, there are First Nations, Métis governments that probably do have projects that they would like to see go ahead. And that's kind of the thing that the Prime Minister was hammering home, is that there has to be not only Indigenous buy-in in terms of backing the project, but that they would benefit financially from the project. And that's why they continue to talk about the loan guarantee program, where they've doubled that to, I believe it's $10 billion now, so that a First Nation could access that and be a partner in whatever this project is and continue to make money off of it going forward as well. So speaking with the actual people, not just assuming that, everybody's against these projects or for these projects, there's lots of different mindsets on all of the projects.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show again, Dennis. Appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
You can listen to Dennis Ward's exclusive interview with Prime Minister Mark Carney on the APTN News YouTube page, or click the link in the episode description. Catch more from Dennis on Truth and Politics, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. This episode was produced by Mark Blackburn and edited by Jesse Andrushko. Charmaine Straker is the executive producer of APTN News InFocus. If you're enjoying the show, please let us know by leaving a rating and review. I'm Cierra Bettens. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.